name's Sarah Murray. I'm author of a book called Making an Exit, From the Magnificent to the Macabre, How We Dignify the Dead. This is the American cover, and here is the British cover. Two very different covers, you can decide which one you prefer. So I thought I'd just read a bit from the book, and I would also like to just introduce the book a little bit and say how I got into this subject. Basically, I travelled around the world looking at how different cultures celebrate the dead. And there were two reasons I really decided to get into this book. One is a frivolous one, which is that, you know, you've seen all those books around about how to, all the places you should see before you die, 1,000 places to see before you die. I thought about, what about the 10 places to go after you're dead? So I thought, well, let's set off and find out. The second reason was a much more serious reason, which was the loss of my father, who after 2 years of cancer died, and we had spoken a lot about what would happen after he died. And he said, look, when I'm dead, that body there will be organic matter. It will have nothing to do with me. I will have long gone. So really you just need to get the hospital to take me off in a cardboard box or a plastic bag, and whatever's the most efficient hygienic matter. I want no funeral, no celebration, nobody standing around my grave. So that was that. And he'd been an atheist all his life, very secular, didn't like speeches or ceremonies. So this was understandable. But we said to him, well, the thing is, you're very popular, and so I think, you know, really, could you write this down, because people are not going to believe why we're not having a funeral for you. So he said fine, he'd write it down, and he left us the document, which I opened after my mother and I opened after he died. And as we'd expected, it said, I want absolutely no funeral, no gathering, that would be anathema to me. You can get my body taken to the crematorium in a cardboard box or a plastic bag, and that was that. And that was entirely as we'd expected. Then, however, there was a last part to it, which was completely unexpected for us, in which he said he would like his ashes scattered over a beautiful churchyard in Dorset, which is the part of England where we all lived and where I grew up. He explained that this wasn't for religious reasons, but because it was a very beautiful place. And it is actually, I mean, it's the most gorgeous spot. We often used to walk up there and stand on the hill and look down at this little church. But the second reason was, he said that he wanted to be resting near where his two best friends were buried, and they were buried in the churchyard of this little church. And so this really got me thinking, because I thought, well, if he wants to think of himself in a beautiful place and resting next to his best friends, you know, that's not organic matter anymore. There's some significance to his remains for him. You know, maybe if you're somebody who hasn't got a heaven to go to, or you're not imagining that, perhaps it's even more important to think about where your remains might lay after you're dead. So I thought, well, if, you know, even my secular father thinks this is important, then it's a subject really worth exploring. And so that's how I set off, and I thought, well, let's go and see how other people do this. And I went off around the world. I went to Iran, I went to Bali, I went to India. I saw everything from extraordinary medieval chapels where chandeliers had been created out of human bones. I watched corpses being burnt on the side of the river by the Ganges in India. I saw amazing, colourful celebrations in Bali where no funeral is supposed to be an unhappy one. It's supposed to be a great, joyous occasion. And so I really saw a huge breadth of things. But I thought the bit I'd read to you from my book would be the most macabre thing that I came across. Because this really I found this quite a disturbing place. And so I'm going to read this section to you. It's about a chapel in Sicily. And I called the chapter Startling Stillness, Death on Display in Sicily. In a northern suburb of Palermo, Sicily, amid 1960s apartment blocks, car mechanics' workshops, and a lingerie store called Mutandina Sexy Duck, is a small plain building in the style of a Greek temple. Attached to a church, it has an unassuming door with a sign above reading Ingresso Catacomb. Entry costs €1.50, paid at a wooden desk manned by a monk in a brown habit with a rope belt. The ticket allows you entry to a crypt, It's just below street level, so the conversation of passers-by on the pavement above are clearly audible. Down in the crypt, however, nobody is talking. Down here is something altogether different. More than 8,000 mummified figures, fully dressed and in a disquieting state of decay. This is the Capuchin catacombs of Palermo. Most of its occupants hang in rows in shallow niches on 20-foot-high walls rising to vaulted ceilings. Others lie in ranks on horizontal shelves below them. Collectively, they make up one of the world's most macabre collections of corpses. While the first arrival was in 1599, most of the dead took up residence here in the 18th and 19th centuries. The last one to be left in the crypt was 2-year-old Rosalie Lombardo, who died in 1920. So the fascination here is not with antiquity. No, what's really strange is seeing at close quarters corpses that are fully dressed. Gentlemen in frock coats, ladies in lace-lined skirts, uniformed military officers, and monks in the same sort of robes worn by the man who sold me my entrance ticket. It's not my first close encounter with mummies. That took place in 1986 in a dingy cave in the Tarim Basin of the Taklamakan, a forbidding tract of desert in China's far northwest province of Xinjiang. Taklamakan means place of no return. I was on a sightseeing tour with a group of fellow backpackers, and at one point our guide herded us into a shallow cave with no explanation as to what was inside. As my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I found myself looking at a wizened body lying on a stone bier. Our guide pronounced the mummy to be from the Tang dynasty, China's rulers from the 7th to the 10th centuries. But something wasn't quite right about this assessment. The leathered features didn't look at all Chinese. With high cheekbones and a long nose, the face seemed distinctly European. Since then, scores of what are now known to be the Caucasian cadavers have been unearthed from the shifting sands of the Taklamakan. For the Chinese, the discovery in the late 1970s of these foreign mummies was proved awkward, revealing previously unknown connections between West and East, and providing a potential rallying point for the Muslims, for the region's Muslims, some of whom want to be free of Beijing's control. What interested me, however, was the chance to look an ancient corpse in the face. It was of a woman, and her body, dressed in shreds of dusty, decayed clothing, was brown, shriveled, and impossibly thin. Turn her sideways, mark her absent, a friend's father would have said. Tiny hands emerged from the sleeves of her disintegrating robe, while her legs were skinny sticks that seemed insufficient to have ever supported her, even her emaciated frame. Time had painted her skin a deep rust colour, as if she'd been charred by some terrible fire. Still, the remains of the features she'd possessed in life were still there. In the dim light, I could make out eyelashes, teeth, fingernails, hair, leathery skin, and even the lines on the palms of her hands. She was more than an engraving on a tombstone or a name in a history book. She had a physical presence, one whose shape and form, albeit dried out and shrunken, resembled the one she'd occupied while alive. Yet time had left her looking far from peaceful. Her open mouth and empty eye sockets gave her a look of extreme suffering. She seemed to be howling. It's the kind of facial expression scholars suggest may have inspired the Scream, Edvard Munch's famous painting of 1893. Several years before he finished the work, an ancient Incan mummy from the Andes appeared at the Exposition Universelle in Paris, a show Munch could have well attended. I wanted to stay longer and scrutinise her features and speculate about the kind of life she'd led. But the guide hustled us out of the cave and into the bright sunshine again, ready for the next stop on our desert tour. A lunch of watermelon and kebabs that, as it turned out, gave me food poisoning so severe that 24 hours later my shrunken body, dehydrated skin and gaunt face looked alarmingly similar to the corpse I'd seen in that cave. Unlike Unlike ancient mummies, the corpses in the Capuchin catacombs of Palermo were mummified without evisceration, that's removal of the internal organs. The monks used a number of preservation methods. One involved dipping the bodies in arsenic or lime, a method often used when disease was prevalent. The other was desiccation, whereby the bodies dried out in special cells called strainers for 8 months. Aided by the area's unique climate and porous limestone subsoil, the bodies just dried out. Then they were washed in vinegar, dressed and suspended in wall niches using wires and nails, all laid out on the horizontal shelves. Today, they're in an appalling state of disintegration. Some retain facial skin, although mostly it hangs off the skull like a leathery mask. But it's the clothes that make the corpses such a disturbing spectacle. Delicate lace collars, cravats emerge from wide-lapelled coats of silk and velvet, endowed with decorative details such as covered buttons and brocade. But these once fine garments now droop sadly, many rotted away into dirty wisps of shredded fabric, adding to the sense of decay and making this parade of deceased humans truly shocking. Some are in glass-fronted coffins, but for the most part these macabre wall decorations are untrammelled, exposed to the cool, musky air of the crypt, with no cabinets, cages or alarm systems to separate them from the visitors. Those lying on the shelves look as if they're languishing in some overcrowded, underfunded medieval hospital. Fingers, toes, bits of rotting cloth hang untidily over the edges of these divans for the dead. I'm not the first person to find this place disconcerting. The ranks of corpses alarmed some early visitors to the Capuchin catacombs. "Horror of horrors! What a spectacle!" exclaimed British writer Catherine Gore in 1845. "Brown skinny arms extending from sleeves of lace, court dresses of silk and satin falling in easy drapery around embroidered silken stockings, and shoes hanging loosely upon withered limbs, while caps or coiffures or fanciful device appear to mock the fearful faces whose smiles once constituted the sunshine of some human heart." However, one individual seems strangely unperturbed by the corpses. In 1952, British writer Evelyn Waugh visited the crypt in the company of his friend Harold Acton. Waugh, who was suffering from rheumatism, responded to the place in a typically eccentric manner. After an hour of scrutinising the grisly relics, Waugh emerged from the crypt, recalls Acton, took one last sniff, pronounced the odour delicious, and tossed away his walking stick, declaring his lameness cured. Before I leave Palermo, I return to the Capuchin catacombs for one more tour of the dark, dank corridors and then their unsettling array of bodies. As the monk hands me my ticket, he gives me a knowing look, as if to say, "See, you think you're horrified by this place, but actually you're fascinated." He's right. And what is perhaps most arresting is the range of emotions on display here. With skulls sinking onto shoulder blades, many of the figures have acquired a melancholy shrug. Others simply smile, but with an expression that's turned into an unsettling grimace. Worse still, many of them appeared to have picked up the same type of food poisoning I came down with in China. With arms crossed over their bellies, they appear to be suffering from painful stomach disruptions. In fact, the twisted, tormented torsos look as if they're struggling to break free of their niches to make a dash for the bathroom. One woman, wearing a blue and white striped dress and what were clearly once smart kid gloves, has a particularly striking pose. With her head tilted back, chin sticking out, and empty eyes rolling towards the heavens, she seems to be in some sort of physical agony. Or is it spiritual passion? Anyone who's seen The Ecstasy of St. Teresa will know the pose. Like Bernini's shockingly sensual sculpture in St. Peter's, Rome, her head is thrown back, her mouth open, whether in pain or pleasure is uncertain. But unlike the beautiful sculpted marble face of St. Teresa, this woman's features have imploded, leaving her with a mash of crumpled yellow leather. For Catherine Gore, the British writer, the contrast between the attire of the unmarried women and their decayed facial features was most disturbing. While they were, she says, arrayed in their white robes with their spotless coronoles, small metal crowns symbolising virginity, with their spotless coronoles upon their brows, the sunken yellow temples and distorted lips impart to the accessories of an angel the countenance of a fiend. There's anger and frustration here too, for some of the corpses have fallen forward and appear to be shouting at an invisible enemy. With a shrivelled mask of a face and a torn hole for a nose and a toothless open mouth, P. Rosario del Parco, who died in 1793 according to the handwritten cardboard note pinned on her chest, seems to be wailing silently at some unknown horror. One priest whose lower jaw has been lost and whose head has slipped onto his chest appears to be chomping into his own robe with what's left of his mouth. Dark humour also echoes through these dingy corridors. A few, with hips hitched up to one side, look as if they're dancing, while others appear to be cackling with laughter, jaws wide open, arms gripping their sides to control their shaking bodies. Fra Modesto de Marsa, who died in 1855, seems in a particularly playful mood. As the dead priest peers down at the corpse below him, his foot has slipped from the edge of his niche and pokes at the shoulder of the fellow below. The section for the children is most upsetting. The small figures hang together like a collection of horror movie dolls. As American traveller Nathaniel Parker Willis put it in 1844, a more horribly hideous collection of little withered faces, shrunken into expressions so inconsistent with the gaiety of their dresses, could scarcely be conceived. What were these families thinking? True, this was once seen as a prestigious burial place, but would you really want your dead relatives pinned to a wall and left looking miserable in a cold, dark corridor? Anyone seeking evidence of a good death, which was a Victorian and a medieval tradition, according to Ars Moriendi traditions, would be hard-pressed to find it here. Today's skilled embalmers certainly wouldn't leave their charges looking like these Sicilian mummies. Even so, I'm thinking that somewhere in my will I must leave a prominent note that says in big bold capital letters, "Do not embalm me." If I need to be preserved for any reason, the refrigerator in the morgue will do just fine. But the prospect of having formaldehyde pumped through my arteries and veins does nothing to alleviate my fear of mortality, quite the opposite in fact. As I leave this extraordinary Sicilian necropolis, I can't help wondering whether the individuals hanging along these walls would have chosen this as their final resting place. For me, this strange display of crumbling organic matter, as my father would have called it, might be chilling, but it's also fascinating. I'm amazed by the desperate human need to project beyond the grave not only our spiritual selves, but our corporeal ones too. We want to live on in body as well as in soul. And it's a desire that persists. After all, until recently, claiming their products could prevent a body from decaying was a powerful marketing tool for casket makers. And at cryogenics labs, people are still signing up to have their bodies deep frozen in the hope that medical advances will one day permit their reuse. Perhaps the Capuchin monks made similar claims. At any rate, their clients clearly had no idea as to how ultimately ineffective the monks' preservation techniques would prove. With hindsight, is this really the eternal image of themselves they would have wanted to present to the world? Thanks very much. That was a bit from my book, and as you may have gathered from the last passage there, part of my exploration was to actually decide what I wanted to do with my body. So just let me say it again, please do not embalm me. But I've devised something for myself, and in fact the last chapter of the book is what I want you all to do with my remains once I'm dead and gone. So now it's in print, I've got no choice, and that's the way it's going to be. All right, thank you very much indeed.